You lock the door at night and tell yourself it's enough. That simple click of the deadbolt is supposed to create an invisible barrier between you and the world outside. It's supposed to mean safety. Inside these walls, nothing can reach you. At least that's what we like to believe. But locks are only pieces of metal, and doors are only slabs of wood. And for some people, they're not obstacles. They're invitations. The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where every house looks like a copy of the next. Lawns trimmed to perfection, porch lights glowing softly in the night, and windows covered by blinds that hide secrets better left unseen. It's the sort of place where people believe bad things don't happen, until they do. On one particular evening, the house at the end of the street sat in darkness, except for the faint glow of a television in the living room. Inside, a young woman stretched out on the couch, half asleep, lulled by the hum of late-night reruns. Her front door was locked. Her windows were shut. The world outside might as well have been a million miles away. But outside, someone was watching. A shadow moved slowly across the lawn, keeping low, avoiding the glow of the street lamp. A figure lingered at the edges of her yard, silent, patient, studying. The house looked ordinary, but to him it wasn't just another structure. It was an opportunity. Every flicker of light inside revealed her movements. Every pause in the TV's dialogue exposed the rhythm of her breathing. And then, as the night grew deeper and the neighborhood fell silent, he made his move. The door was locked. But the lock wasn't enough. This is not just a story about a home invasion. It's about what happens when the walls of safety crumble, when a stranger slips past the barriers you thought would protect you. What unfolded inside that house was more than a break-in. It was a nightmare that still echoes through the community to this day, and it began the moment the lock failed to keep him out. To understand the horror of that night, you first need to know the world she lived in, the kind of life she thought she was protecting when she locked her front door. Her name was Emily Carter, 26 years old, a schoolteacher in a modest town where crime was considered something that happened elsewhere. People here trusted their neighbors. They waved as they passed one another on the street. Children rode their bikes until sunset, and parents rarely worried if they'd be home before dark. Emily lived alone in a small rental house on a corner lot, just big enough for her and her cat Milo. Her friends often teased her for being overly cautious, always double-checking her locks, always leaving the porch light on, always pulling the curtains shut at night. But Emily had grown up on true crime stories, reading late into the night about break-ins, stalkers, and disappearances. Maybe that's why she was so careful. Maybe that's why she thought she was prepared. The truth, however, is more unsettling. Being prepared doesn't mean being safe. On the other side of town, Daniel Reed was watching. To most, he was invisible, a man in his mid-30s who worked odd jobs, drifted from rental to rental and never stayed long enough to make friends. But he carried a history: burglary charges, arrests for trespassing, police reports that never led to convictions. A predator hiding in plain sight, Daniel had learned patience. He didn't just pick a house at random. He studied, he waited. He followed routines. To him, Emily's little corner house was perfect. Isolated from the main street, partially hidden by trees, and occupied by someone who lived alone. Her caution ironically made her stand out. He noticed the way her porch light clicked on at the same time every night, the way she always locked her car before entering, the way she checked her blinds before bed. Her efforts told him something important. She was afraid, and fear attracts hunters. While Emily carried on with her quiet life, grading papers, watching late-night TV, chatting with friends, Daniel was circling her world. Closer and closer each day. What she thought were layers of protection, he saw as challenges to be overcome. The night the lock clicked shut, she thought she was safe. He knew she wasn't. Before we continue deeper into this story, what about you? Have you ever had a moment where you thought you were safe, but something happened that made you doubt it? Share your experience in the comments. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe to Night Whispers, and join our community of listeners who know that the scariest stories are the ones that are true. It was just after midnight when the air outside grew still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, the soft glow of the television flickering across her face. Her cat stretched lazily at her feet, purring in rhythm with the low hum of the screen. For her, it was just another ordinary night. For Daniel, It was the moment he had been waiting for. He approached from the side yard where the shadows of the oak trees swallowed him whole. Every step was deliberate, every pause calculated. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't impulsive. He was rehearsed, like an actor stepping into a role he'd played too many times before. The front door was locked, as he expected. He tried the handle anyway, more for ritual than necessity, listening to the metallic rattle echo faintly in the quiet night. Locked, but locks never stopped him. His hand slid into his pocket, pulling out a thin metal tool, one he'd carried countless times. Within seconds, the deadbolt surrendered with a muted click. Inside, the television masked the faint sound of the door easing open. Daniel slipped into the darkness of the entryway, closing the door gently behind him. The smell of lavender drifted through the air, an air freshener plugged into the wall, a detail he would remember later when police asked what he noticed first. To him, it wasn't a home anymore. It was prey. Emily stirred slightly, shifting on the couch, unaware of the shadow now gliding closer. Milo, her cat, raised his head, ears twitching, eyes locking onto the intruder. A low growl rumbled in his throat, but Emily, half asleep, thought nothing of it. Daniel crept through the living room, studying the details, the photos on the wall, the half-empty glass of water on the table, the phone left just out of reach. He wasn't just there to take, he was there to control. To remind her that the lock, the light, the curtains, none of it mattered, and then in an instant everything shifted. Milo hissed, leaping off the couch, startling Emily awake. Her eyes opened groggily at first, adjusting to the blur of the room. That's when she saw it. The outline of a man standing just feet away, a silhouette carved out by the flicker of her television. Her scream cut through the silence. She scrambled off the couch, heart pounding so violently she could feel it in her throat. But Daniel moved quickly, grabbing her arm before she could reach the hallway. The weight of his grip was crushing, his voice a whisper in her ear. Don't make a sound. The world collapsed into chaos. Emily kicked, clawed, and twisted, her voice breaking into a panicked cry that seemed to vanish into the walls. She lunged toward the phone, but Daniel was stronger, dragging her back, his shadow swallowing her in the dim glow. For Emily, this was the moment her worst fears became reality. All those nights she had checked her locks, all those times she thought she was cautious, it meant nothing now. The barrier had failed. The predator was inside, and the nightmare had only just begun. When neighbors were jolted awake by Emily's screams, it was already too late. By the time police arrived, Daniel was gone and Emily was left bruised, trembling, and shattered. Her once quiet little house now felt like a stage where the unimaginable had played out. The front door, her so-called shield, hung slightly ajar, its lock broken like a cruel joke. Officers moved quickly, sectioning off the property with yellow tape, their flashlights cutting through the stillness of the night. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of lavender, but it was now laced with something heavier, fear, sweat, as the lingering presence of a man who should never have been there. Detectives began piecing the story together. Emily, her voice unsteady, recounted everything she could. The sound of the lock clicking open, the sudden shadow in her living room, the whisper in her ear. She described his height, the roughness of his grip, the smell of cigarettes clinging to his clothes. And then there was the detail most would have missed. He had called her by her name. How did he know her? The question cut deeper than anything else. Had he followed her? Watched her? Did he know her routine better than she knew it herself? Detectives suspected he had been stalking her for weeks, maybe months, studying her every move. The porch light, the curtains, the timing of her television, all of it had become breadcrumbs for a predator. Forensic teams combed through the house, searching for prints, fibers, anything left behind. On the entryway floor, they found faint scuff marks from a shoe, cheap work boots worn at the heel. On the doorknob, a partial fingerprint smudged but still identifiable. Down beneath the window, a cigarette butt half buried in the soil. The evidence painted a picture of someone practiced, someone who lingered close enough to observe, but careless enough to leave traces of his presence. Within days, police cross-referenced the fingerprint against old records. The name surfaced: Daniel Reed, a history of burglary, multiple trespassing charges, police reports of him peering into windows, always dismissed as minor offenses. He was a ghost in the system, slipping through cracks again and again. When detectives visited his last known address, the apartment was empty. No forwarding details, no personal belongings, he had vanished. But neighbors described him in chilling detail. They said he would sit for hours on his porch, smoking, watching the street. One neighbor recalled how he once muttered, "Locks don't keep me out. They just slow me down." The community, once comfortable and trusting, now lived in fear. Doors were reinforced, security systems installed, porch lights left burning through the night. Every creak of the floor, every rustle outside became a reminder. Safety was an illusion. Emily, meanwhile, lived with more than fear. She lived with the memory of that whisper in her ear, a sound so quiet yet so devastating, echoing in her head long after he had slipped into the shadows. And even though police had a name, the hunt was only beginning. Daniel was out there somewhere, watching, waiting. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life unraveled in ways she never imagined. Her little corner house, once a place of comfort, became a prison of memories. She could no longer sit in her living room without hearing the echo of his whisper. She could no longer close her eyes without seeing his shadow loom closer in the dark. The smell of cigarettes, the faint creak of a door, even the flicker of her television, all of it became triggers that clawed at her sanity. The community rallied behind her, but their support was laced with their own terror. Neighbors who once left doors unlocked now triple-checked them. Families who had felt insulated from danger now looked at every stranger with suspicion. A collective fear took hold, spreading like a sickness. It wasn't just Emily who had been invaded. It was everyone. Police continued their search for Daniel Reed, but he seemed to slip through every net. Rumors spread, sightings in nearby towns, vague descriptions from people who swore they saw him lurking near convenience stores or abandoned houses. But nothing stuck. Each lead dissolved into smoke. It was as if he knew how to stay just far enough ahead, feeding on the fear he had created. Emily attempted to rebuild her life. She moved in temporarily with her sister, away from the house that had betrayed her trust. Therapy helped her put words to the nightmares, but even there the question haunted her. Why her? Why had he chosen her house, her routine, her life? The answer was as cruel as it was simple. Because he could. Because the lock wasn't enough. Months later, an arrest was finally made. Daniel had been caught breaking into another home, not far from Emily's. When officers pulled him into custody, he reportedly smirked, muttering under his breath, "They always think the door will stop me." The trial was swift. Daniel's past caught up with him, and the evidence against him was undeniable. He was sentenced to decades behind bars. For the community, it was a victory. For Emily, it was only partial relief. The man might be caged, but the fear he left behind remained. Even today, Emily's story is retold as a warning. Not because she was careless, but because she wasn't. She did everything right. Locked doors, drawn curtains, lights on. And still, it wasn't enough. And maybe that's the most terrifying truth of all, that sometimes evil doesn't need an invitation. Sometimes it forces its way inside, reminding us how fragile our sense of safety really is. So tonight, when you lock your doors, when you pull your curtains tight and check the windows twice, remember Emily Carter. And remember that the barrier between you and the world outside may be thinner than you think, because a locked door isn't always enough.